Look, I'm not saying humans are the best species in the galaxy at handling other species' offspring. That would be bragging, and we try to stay modest about our various talents. I'm just saying that when Ambassador Krill of the Vrextheer Dominion came storming into Starbase 247's premier Interspecies Care Center demanding to know my qualifications, I might have been a bit too honest. I once successfully babysat a litter of Terran wolverines, I said, adjusting my name tag that read Parker Maxwell Chief Assistant Caretaker, and I still have all my fingers. The ambassador's secondary mouth twitched, which I'd learned was either a sign of amusement or imminent violence with their species. Given that all 4 of their arms were currently crossed, I was betting on the latter. You consider this. Relevant experience. The universal translator couldn't quite capture the mix of incredulity and disdain in their voice, but their spinal ridges were doing that peculiar ripple thing that basically screamed, "You absolute moron." I shrugged, a gesture that I'd discovered was wonderfully ambiguous across most species. Well, they were particularly grumpy wolverines. Had to bottle feed them every 2 hours. They tried to eat my face 3 times before breakfast, but we worked through our trust issues. Behind the ambassador, my boss, the esteemed Dr. Nix L.A., a centaurian with far too many degrees in xenopediatrics, was making their equivalent of a face palm. All 6 of their eye stalks were curled in what I'd come to recognize as mortified embarrassment. But here's the thing about humans that most species don't quite get. We have this incredibly useful ability to be completely truthful while simultaneously underselling and overselling ourselves. It's a talent born from millennia of dealing with job interviews and first dates. Besides, I continued, gesturing to the playpen where I'd successfully managed to get a baby Jovian gas floater to share its favorite hydrogen snacks with a young Martian crystal crawler. I'm pretty good at improvising. Did you know that Arcturian slug tots really love bubble wrap? Keeps them entertained for hours. We just have to make sure they don't try to eat it. The ambassador's upper set of eyes narrowed while their lower set widened, a classic Vrextheer expression of confused calculation. I could practically see them running risk assessments in their head. Their species was notorious for being protective of their young, to the point where this was the first time in recorded history they were even considering leaving their cubs with non-Vrextheer caregivers. And what they finally asked, mandibles clicking in what I assumed was suppressed anxiety, "Makes you think you could handle Vrextheer cubs? We are apex predators. Our young can bite through titanium alloy before they learn to walk." I grinned, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my special emergency snack, a protein bar that could survive a nuclear blast and probably predated the formation of several small stars. Good thing I always carried titanium-grade teething toys then, and snacks that could double as building materials if we ever need to construct an emergency shelter. That got me another mandible click. But this time it was accompanied by that weird chirping sound that meant either they were amused or planning my imminent demise. In my experience, there was usually about a 50-50 chance either way. Dr. Nix L.A. had finally recovered enough to glide forward, probably to try and salvage the situation with actual professional credentials and statistical safety records. But before they could speak, one of the ambassador's cubs, who had been suspiciously quiet until now, launched itself from its hiding spot behind their parents' ceremonial robes directly at my face. Now, most species would flinch. It's a natural reaction when 8 pounds of razor-sharp claws and teeth are hurtling toward your relatively soft and puncturable head. But anyone who spent time around Terran cats knows exactly what to do in this situation. I caught the cub mid-leap, redirected its momentum into a gentle spin, and ended up with an armful of purring Vrextheer youngling, who was now trying to groom my hair with its secondary tongue. "Oh yeah," I said casually, scratching under the cub's chin with my free hand. "I also used to volunteer at a big cat sanctuary. You should see my lion whispering credentials." And that, my friends, is how I ended up responsible for the first Vrextheer cubs ever entrusted to non-Vrextheer care. Though in retrospect, maybe I should have mentioned the wolverines had actually been stuffed animals, and my cat sanctuary experience was mainly cleaning litter boxes. But hey, how much trouble could a few apex predator cubs really be? Narrators note the answer, as it turns out, was quite a lot of trouble indeed. Remember how I said Vrextheer cubs can bite through titanium alloy before they learn to walk? Well, it turns out that's not just proud parent bragging, it's actually a massive understatement. By the end of my first hour with the triplets, I'd gone through 14 indestructible toys, 3 reinforced play mats, and 1 very unfortunate maintenance droid that made the mistake of beeping too aggressively in their general direction. "Okay, kids," I said, watching as little Trix systematically dismantled what had previously been an industrial-grade climbing frame. Let's try something different. Vex and Rix, the other two cubs, paused their game of who can headbutt the hardest to stare at me with all four of their eyes. I'd quickly learned that this level of focused attention from Vrexthier cubs usually preceded either a brilliant moment of interspecies bonding or complete chaos. The odds were about 10 to 90 in favor of chaos. I reached into my emergency kit, which by now resembled a doomsday prepper's panic room, and pulled out my secret weapon, a roll of bubble wrap. The cub's head frills perked up immediately. "Now I know what you're thinking," I said, slowly unrolling the precious cargo. "This looks suspiciously like that boring force field material your parent wrapped around your transport pod. But watch this." I popped one bubble. The reaction was instantaneous. All three cubs froze, their sensory whiskers vibrating at what I'm pretty sure was the exact frequency of pure joy. Their secondary mouths dropped open in perfect synchronized amazement. "Yeah," I grinned, popping another bubble. "That's right. Each one makes its own unique sound. It's like a puzzle and a snack wrapper combined." Of course, that's when Ambassador Krill decided to make their surprise inspection visit. They burst through the door in full diplomatic regalia, probably expecting to catch me failing miserably at handling their precious offspring. Instead, they found their cubs sitting in a circle, taking turns carefully popping bubbles with their claws while I taught them how to make different pitch sounds by varying the pressure. We'd even worked out the first few notes of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, though our version sounded more like a garbage compactor having an existential crisis. The ambassador's mandibles did that weird twitchy thing again. "What exactly are you doing with my cubs?" "Teaching them the basics of acoustic physics through interactive play," I replied smoothly. "Thank you, 3 years of working in retail, I could now BS with the best of them. It helps develop fine motor control and promotes cooperative learning behaviors." I carefully didn't mention that I'd discovered this technique by accident when I was unpacking some new equipment, and the cubs went absolutely bonkers over the sound. Sometimes the best teaching moments come from happy accidents and mild property damage. "And this is safe?" They eyed the bubble wrap suspiciously, probably trying to calculate its tensile strength and toxicity levels. "Completely harmless," I assured them. "Though I should warn you, they might try to recreate the popping sounds at home by crushing your furniture. But hey, at least they're not eating it anymore, right?" That's when little Vex decided to demonstrate their new skill by performing a perfect rendition of what I'm pretty sure was the Vrexthier national anthem in bubble wrap pops. The ambassador's secondary mouth dropped open in what I hoped was impressed surprise rather than horrified rage. "That's actually the traditional hatchling's first hunt melody," they said weakly. "How did they?" "Oh, you know how it is," I waved casually. "Kids pick up everything. Yesterday they learned about gravitational constants by watching me chase down a floating Jovian infant who got too excited about their lunch. Did you know that if you combine anti-grav diapers with pureed quantum carrots, you can break at least 3 laws of physics?" The ambassador made a sound that might have been a laugh, if laughs could sound like someone strangling a saxophone. "You are not what I expected, Caretaker Maxwell." "Thanks." I think I was about to elaborate when the station's lights flickered ominously. The cubs, naturally, took this as a signal to begin their favorite game, Let's All Pounce on Parker at Once. As I went down under a pile of happily chirping apex predator babies, I caught sight of Dr. Nix L.A. in the doorway, their eye stalks all pointing in different directions, never a good sign. "Parker," they said in that too calm voice that meant something had gone terribly wrong, "we may have a slight situation developing." And that's when the real fun began. Remember, kids, always keep extra bubble wrap in your emergency kit. You never know when you'll need to entertain a group of alien cubs during what's about to become the most interesting shift of your career. You know that moment when everything goes wrong at once, and you realize all your jokes about being prepared for anything are about to be put to the test? Yeah, this was that moment. The station's lights didn't just flicker this time, they died completely, leaving us in the eerie red glow of emergency lighting. The gentle hum of environmental systems, that background noise you never notice until it's gone, faded into silence. And because the universe has a sense of humor, this happened right as Ambassador Krill was leaving for the biggest diplomatic summit of the cycle. "The backup systems will engage momentarily," Dr. Nix L.A. assured everyone, their eye stalks swiveling independently to monitor all corners of the room. Though I noticed they were slowly backing away from the door, which was never a good sign. They were right about the backup systems engaging. They were wrong about it helping. The ventilation kicked in with a wheeze that sounded like a chain-smoking elephant trying to play a kazoo. The air that began circulating had a distinctly wrong quality to it, not immediately dangerous, but definitely not the carefully maintained atmospheric mix our various species needed. I watched as the environmental readout on my wrist display standard issue for all caregivers dealing with multi-species children began showing numbers that made absolutely no sense. The temperature was fluctuating wildly, humidity was doing things that defied several laws of physics, and the atmospheric composition was starting to resemble a bad day on Venus. This is suboptimal, I said, using what Dr. Nix LA called my suspiciously calm human voice. The Vrextheer cubs, who had been contentedly shredding their 15th set of unbreakable toys, suddenly went still. Their sensory whiskers began vibrating in that way that meant they were picking up something the rest of us couldn't yet detect. Given that Vrextheer evolved as apex predators on a death world that made Australia look like a petting zoo, this was concerning. The summit chamber ambassador Krill's voice crackled through the emergency comm system, appears to be sealed, with all of us inside it. By all of us they meant every adult Vrextheer on the station, along with about 24 other species diplomatic representatives, which explained why the cubs' whiskers were doing their best impression of seismographs during an earthquake. They could sense their parents' growing anxiety. The environmental systems in the summit chamber are struggling, the ambassador continued, their voice carrying that special tone that meant I'm trying very hard not to panic but seriously considering it as an option. That's when I noticed the temperature was dropping. Not in the gentle someone left the window open way, but in the who ordered liquid nitrogen for breakfast way. The cubs huddled closer together, their scales beginning to dull, a sure sign they were getting too cold. Dr. Nix LA's eye stalks all curved into what I recognized as their were completely screwed position. The emergency shelter is 3 levels down, they said, but with the lifts non-functional and the main corridors potentially compromised. I looked at my charge's 3 Vrextheer cubs, 2 Jovian gas floaters gently bobbing near the ceiling, a clutch of Martian crystal crawler eggs that were starting to pulse worryingly, and various other assorted alien younglings who all had very specific environmental needs that were rapidly not being met. Right, I said, reaching for my emergency kit. Time for Plan H. Plan H, Dr. Nix LA's eye stalks straightened in confusion. Yeah, you know Plan Human. I started pulling out supplies, emergency thermal blankets, portable atmosphere generators, and yes, more bubble wrap. Because when all else fails, you can count on humans to come up with a completely ridiculous plan that has no business working but somehow does anyway. The cubs perked up as I pulled out the bubble wrap, probably hoping for another music lesson. Sorry kids, this time it was for insulation. Though I had to admit, the popping sounds might come in handy for keeping everyone calm during what was about to become the galaxy's most unusual evacuation. Dr. Nix LA, I said, wrapping the crystal crawler eggs in thermal blankets while simultaneously using my foot to prevent Trix from eating a piece of the now failing environmental control panel. I'm going to need you to trust me on this one. All 6 of their eye stalks focused on me with laser intensity. The last time you said that, we ended up with a zero-gravity ballet performance by the Plutonian slug tots. Hey, they won first prize in the station's talent show, didn't they? I grinned, already mentally plotting our route to the emergency shelter. Besides, this time will be much more interesting. We're about to attempt something that's either going to be a brilliant display of human ingenuity or the galaxy's most memorable daycare disaster. The lights flickered again, and the temperature dropped another few degrees. The cubs huddled closer to me, their scales now a concerning shade of gray. When you say interesting, Dr. Nix LA began, I mean we're about to find out exactly why humans are considered either the galaxy's best or craziest babysitters. I hoisted my emergency kit onto my shoulder and scooped up the nearest cub. Now, who's ready for an adventure? The answering chorus of chirps, whistles, and what might have been either excited squeals or warning sirens, it's hard to tell with Jovian gas floaters, suggested that at least some of our charges were up for it. The rest were probably just looking forward to the chaos that inevitably followed human emergency planning. And chaos, my friends, was about to become our best friend. Because when you're responsible for a dozen alien kids with wildly different biological needs, and everything that could go wrong has gone wrong, sometimes the only solution is to embrace the madness and hope your species' reputation for pulling off the impossible holds true for just one more day. Spoiler alert, it did. Though I'm still not sure how we're going to explain the thing with the maintenance droid and the makeshift petting zoo to station management. Listen, I've had some interesting days as a daycare worker. There was the time we had to convince a baby Neptunian cloud whale that the station's plasma conduits weren't food. Or that memorable afternoon when a Martian crystal crawler decided to metamorphose a day early and we all learned that soundproof rooms aren't necessarily crystalline psychic resonance proof. But leading a parade of alien children through failing station corridors while juggling environmental needs that contradicted several laws of physics? That was definitely going in my top 5. Everyone stay together, I called out, checking my wrist display for the umpteenth time. Jovian floaters, remember your buddy system. No tricks. The wall panels are not snacks, I don't care how shiny they are. Dr. Nixele glided alongside me, all 6 eye stalks swiveling in different directions like the world's most anxious surveillance system. The atmospheric pressure is becoming problematic. That was an understatement. The corridor ahead was starting to look like a heat mirage, which was impressive considering it was also approaching temperatures that would make a penguin ask for a sweater. The station's environmental systems weren't just failing, they were having what humans would call a mental breakdown. Okay, time for a creativity check, I muttered, pulling up short at a junction. The cubs, who had been surprisingly well behaved, only 3 attempted escapes and 1 half-hearted attempt to eat a light fixture, clustered around my legs. We've got 3 possible routes to the emergency shelter. One's too hot, one's too cold, and one's got gravity fluctuations that would make a roller coaster jealous. Perhaps we should, Dr. Nixele began, but they were interrupted by a distant sound that reminded me of a garbage disposal trying to digest a metal chair. Change of plans, I announced, quickly distributing emergency gear. Everyone grab a buddy and a thermal blanket. Jovian floaters, you're our advanced scouts. Those gas bags of yours are perfect for detecting pressure changes. Crystal crawler eggs go in the insulated carrier, and somebody please make sure Vex stops trying to adopt that maintenance droid. The droid in question beeped pathetically as Vex attempted to groom it with their secondary tongue. At least the cub's parental instincts were kicking in at a convenient time. But the designated evacuation routes, Dr. Nixele protested, are probably about as useful as a chocolate teapot right now, I finished, already hurting our charges toward what maintenance logs labeled as storage shaft 7B, but what I discovered was actually a pretty decent shortcut during my late-night snack runs. Sometimes you have to think outside the box, or in this case, inside the maintenance shafts. That's when I unveiled my secret weapon, the anti-grav card I'd modified for just such an occasion. Well, technically I'd modified it for moving heavy supplies, but I'd always suspected it might come in handy for an impromptu evacuation. All aboard the HMS, please don't let this plan fail, I announced with more cheer than the situation probably warranted. Crystal crawler eggs in the padded compartment, smaller species in the main carriage, and Vrextheer cubs. Well, you 3 just keep doing what you're doing. What they were doing, as it turned out, was forming a surprisingly effective honor guard around the cart, their predator instincts apparently extending to protecting smaller species in times of crisis. Who knew apex predator cubs could be so helpful when they weren't trying to eat the furniture? This is highly irregular, Dr. Nixele observed as I began securing everyone in place with a combination of safety harnesses and what might have been slightly too much bubble wrap. Irregular is what humans do best, I replied, checking the cart's power supply. Besides, irregular beats frozen, cooked, or subjected to gravity that can't make up its mind. The next 20 minutes were a blur of problem-solving that would have made MacGyver proud. We used emergency thermal blankets as makeshift slides over the really bad patches. The Jovian floaters turned out to be excellent at neutralizing gravity fluctuations when properly motivated. Turns out they really like those quantum carrots I keep in my emergency kit. And the Vrextheer cubs? They apparently have a previously undocumented talent for detecting structural weaknesses before they become structural failures. Left here, I called out as Rix's whiskers started vibrating like crazy. 3 seconds later, the corridor we would have taken collapsed with a sound that suggested the station's architects might want to review their warranty policies. We had to stop twice, once for an emergency diaper change that violated at least 3 laws of thermodynamics, and once because the Martian crystal crawler eggs decided this was the perfect time to start their pre-hatching harmonics. Do you know how hard it is to maintain a stable resonance field with makeshift equipment, while also preventing 3 overexcited Vrextheer cubs from investigating what they probably thought was the world's most interesting sound toy? But the real challenge came when we reached the final stretch. The emergency shelter was just ahead, through a section of corridor that was alternating between sauna and deep freeze every 30 seconds. Well, I said, looking at my charges who were all displaying various species-appropriate signs of either excitement or terror with some species, it's really hard to tell the difference, who's ready to learn about human timing. Dr. Nick's LA's eye stalks all curved in that way that meant they were calculating the odds of survival and not liking the results. Please tell me you're not planning what I think you're planning. I grinned, pulling out my last emergency thermal blanket and what was definitely not supposed to be a repurposed plasma conduit regulator. Doctor, let me introduce you to a time-honored human tradition, the running grid ball play. As I started explaining my plan, I could have sworn I heard the station itself groan in anticipation. Or maybe that was just another environmental system giving up the ghost. Either way, we were about to give the station security cameras footage that would probably end up in both the How Not to Handle Emergencies training videos and the Why Humans Are Terrifying orientation package for new diplomatic staff. The best part? This wasn't even the craziest part of our day. That was still coming up. But hey, at least the Cubs were having fun. Though I'm pretty sure teaching them to use their natural electromagnetic field generation abilities to help power makeshift environmental shields wasn't in my job description. Then again, neither was turning an emergency evacuation into an impromptu physics lesson, but sometimes you have to multitask. Here's the thing about emergency shelters, they're great in theory, but they tend to forget that emergency doesn't always mean exactly the kind of emergency we planned for. When we finally reached the shelter's entrance, I discovered two very important facts. First, the environmental controls were stuck in what the display helpfully described as default mode, which I'm pretty sure was computer speak for good luck dealing with this mess. Second, the backup power system was being about as cooperative as a cat at bath time. Well, I said, staring at the control panel that was blinking in what I chose to interpret as a mocking manner, this is less than ideal. Dr. Nick's LA's eye stalks were doing their best impression of an anxiety-driven interpretive dance. The shelter's atmospheric processors cannot maintain separate environments for multiple species in this condition. The Cubs, who had been remarkably well behaved during our adventure through the station's maintenance shafts, chose this moment to demonstrate why their species was considered the galaxy's apex predators. Trix started methodically testing the shelter's wall panels for structural weaknesses, while Vex and Rix coordinated what appeared to be a tactical assessment of the ventilation system. That's when I had what Dr. Nick's LA would later call one of those terrifying human moments of inspiration. Hey kids, I said, reaching into my now considerably lighter emergency kit, who wants to help build a fort? The universal translator hiccuped, trying to convey the concept of fort to multiple species at once, but some ideas transcend language. The Cubs' whiskers perked up immediately, and even the Jovian gas floaters bobbed with interest. Parker, Dr. Nick's LA said in that tone that meant they were trying very hard to be patient, this is hardly the time for implementing an emergency environmental control solution using available materials and cooperative effort. I grinned, already laying out supplies. I couldn't agree more. Trix, sweetie, that support beam is load-bearing. Let's find you something else to chew on. What followed was either the galaxy's most impressive display of improvisational engineering or its most elaborate playdate, possibly both. We used thermal blankets and portable force field generators to create separate environmental zones. The Vrexthier Cubs, it turned out, were surprisingly good at maintaining the structural integrity of our makeshift habitats once I convinced them it was a game of protect the nest. The Jovian floaters used their natural buoyancy to help create air circulation patterns that would have made a fluid dynamics professor weep with joy. The crystal crawler eggs, which had finally decided to start their hatching sequence, actually helped stabilize the temperature gradients with their crystalline resonance. This is Dr. Nick's LA observed as our shelter within a shelter took shape, actually working. Never underestimate the combined power of desperate humans and cooperative children, I replied, using bubble wrap and emergency sealant to reinforce a particularly tricky corner. Besides, this isn't even the craziest thing I've built with daycare supplies. Remember the great glitter incident of last month? We had unanimously agreed never to speak of that again. The real breakthrough came when little Rix, who had been watching me jury-rig a pressure regulator, suddenly chittered in what I recognized as their "I have an idea" sound. Before anyone could react, they had gathered their siblings and positioned them around the main environmental control unit. Of course I snapped my fingers, probably a bit too enthusiastically given how it made the Martian crystal crawlers vibrate. Vrexthier natural electromagnetic field generation. Dr. Nick's LA, remember how the Cubs were affecting the maintenance droid's circuits earlier? All 6 eye stalks widened in comprehension. You can't possibly mean to use the Cubs' natural abilities to help stabilize the shelter's power systems. That's exactly what I mean. I knelt down to eye level with the Cubs. What do you say, kids? Want to help save the day? Their answer was to immediately begin generating an electromagnetic field that made my hair stand on end and the shelter's systems light up like a Christmas tree, having an existential crisis. Careful with the harmonics I coached, watching the power reading stabilize. That's it, just like the bubble wrap music. Nice and steady. The next few minutes were a blur of adjustments, improvisations, and what might have technically been several violations of physics as we understood it. The crystal crawler eggs hatched at exactly the right moment to create a resonance pattern that helped stabilize the cub's electromagnetic field. The Jovian floaters instinctively positioned themselves to optimize air circulation. Even the maintenance droid Vex had adopted got in on the act, its partially rewired systems somehow contributing to our jerry-rigged environmental controls. Parker, Dr. Nix LA said quietly as we watched our various charges work together in what could only be described as a symphony of cooperative chaos. I believe you may have accidentally invented a new form of xenotechnology. Nah, I waved dismissively, even as I made a mental note to write this up for the Xenopediatrics journal later. This is just classic human emergency improvisation combined with good old-fashioned teamwork. Speaking of which, the shelter's main display, which had been showing various alert messages in at least 12 different languages, suddenly cleared. The power reading stabilized. The environmental controls stopped their impression of a malfunctioning disco and settled into a steady hum. And that's when the shelter's door chimed, announcing the arrival of some very worried alien parents who were about to discover their children had just helped save the day through the power of cooperative fort building. So I said to the cubs, who were looking entirely too pleased with themselves, who's ready to show their parents what they learned about emergency management and environmental engineering? The answering chorus of happy chirps was probably audible 3 decks away, though that might have been because they had figured out how to amplify their vocalizations using the shelter's acoustic systems. Who says you can't combine childcare with advanced xenotechnology? Fun fact, trying to explain to a room full of diplomatic representatives how their children helped save the day through the power of fort building and improvisational engineering is exactly as challenging as it sounds. Especially when half your audience consists of apex predators who are still trying to process the fact that their cubs learned to play musical bubble wrap. So you see, I concluded, standing before the hastily convened emergency session of the station's diplomatic council, the environmental crisis actually provided an unexpected opportunity for practical education in xenobiology, cooperative problem-solving, and emergency management. Ambassador Krill's mandibles were doing that thing again, but this time I was pretty sure it was amusement. Probably. I mean, they hadn't eaten me yet, which I took as a positive sign. You turned an emergency evacuation, they said slowly, into a teaching opportunity. Well, technically the kids turned it into a teaching opportunity. I just provided the bubble wrap and refused to panic. I shrugged. Sometimes the best lessons happen when everything goes wrong in exactly the right way. The council chamber erupted in what I chose to interpret as positive chaos. The Jovian representatives were releasing pleased pheromones that made everyone's hair stand on end. The Martian delegation was resonating at their species equivalent of enthusiastic applause. And the Vrextheer. Well, they were doing something with their secondary mouths that looked either very approving or deeply threatening. Furthermore, Dr. Nix LA added, their eye stalks curved in what I now recognized as pride. Caretaker Maxwell's methods have resulted in unprecedented advances in cross-species cooperation among our younger charges. The crystal crawler hatchlings have formed a symbiotic relationship with the Vrextheer cubs. And the Jovian floaters are showing remarkable progress in their spatial awareness training. They're using the cubs' electromagnetic fields as navigation beacons, I explained. Turns out apex predator babies make excellent teaching assistants when they're not trying to eat the furniture. That's when Ambassador Krill did something unprecedented in the history of human Vrextheer relations. They laughed. Not the usual predatory chuckle that made most species check their evacuation routes, but a genuine laugh that sounded like a combination of purring and wind chimes. The Vrextheer Dominion, they announced, mandibles still twitching with amusement, would like to formally request that Caretaker Maxwell be appointed as the official guardian for all Vrextheer young on this station. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Dr. Nix LA's eye stalks all swiveling to stare at me at once. Thank you, I managed, trying not to show how much I was internally freaking out. Though I should probably mention that my lion-whispering credentials might have been slightly exaggerated. You maintained the safety and well-being of our cubs during a station-wide crisis, Ambassador Krill replied. You taught them valuable skills through what I'm told is the human concept of play, and most importantly, you showed them how to cooperate with other species without compromising their predatory instincts. They paused, all four eyes glinting. The fact that you did this while apparently making up most of your plan as you went along only makes it more impressive. That's kind of our species' specialty, I admitted. We call it winging it with style. And that, believe it or not, is how I became the first human officially entrusted with the care of Rex Thier Young. It's also how the station's daycare center ended up with a permanent emergency fort building supplies section, and why the Xenopediatrics manual now includes a chapter on innovative cross-species cooperation techniques, human edition. The cubs? They're doing great. We've moved on from bubble wrap music to what I'm calling synchronized electromagnetic resonance art. The maintenance droid that Vex adopted is now our official classroom assistant, though it still beeps nervously whenever anyone mentions the evacuation incident. Dr. Nix LA has stopped having anxiety attacks every time I announce I have an idea, though they do keep an emergency response team on standby, just in case. The Crystal Crawler hatchlings have formed what amounts to a fan club for the Rex Thier Cubs, and the Jovian floaters are teaching everyone the basics of zero-gravity dance. As for me? Well, let's just say my emergency kit now includes twice as much bubble wrap, a complete fort-building toolkit, and a note from the station's engineering department begging me to please warn them the next time I plan to revolutionize xenotechnology through the power of improvised childcare. But hey, at least no one questions my qualifications anymore. Though I still haven't told them about the Wolverines being stuffed animals. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. And if anyone asks how humans became the galaxy's most trusted babysitters, just tell them it's because we know that sometimes the best solution to a crisis is a combination of quick thinking, endless adaptability, and an emergency supply of bubble wrap. Trust me, it works every time. Usually. Most of the time. Okay, at least 60% of the time, but those are pretty good odds in the childcare business. End note: the station's safety protocols now include a section titled The Maxwell Protocols for Unexpected Cross-Species Cooperation. I'm trying not to let it go to my head, but the Cubs did make me a crown out of spare parts and bubble wrap, so I think a little pride is justified.